Hey, Kurt.
Hey, well, that was fun. I feel I had a lucky couple of weeks here. I get to first have a coworker and then one of my first mentors in higher education and conduct, Cyndi.
I just learned your origin story too when we were asking about her origin story.
Oh, it's so funny.
Um, Interesting.
And when I think about the amount of time in between when I worked with Cyndi and I worked with you, it seems like it was at the time so far apart. But in reality, I think it was maybe 5 years in between when I was with Cyndi and when you and I worked together.
Yeah.
And now it seems so long ago.
I was nervous as we were talking with her that we were going to go on a nostalgia trip
Yeah.
about like how things were then and
Yeah.
they're not like that now. And by the end, I was so convinced people's need to be
Yeah.
connected is more strong than ever. What it looks like is
Hmm.
different, and I really felt like it was almost a challenge of imagination to see if we could figure out how humans can connect again.
Yeah, I agree. I was feeling the same way that you couldn't replicate what we had back then. But the more we talked, I do feel like those things still happen. They just happen in places that I, as somebody my age, maybe does not recognize them. But it does beg the question: how can we facilitate that on campus instead of forcing people to do things the way that we used to do them? How can
Hmm.
we use what platforms they're on and extrapolate?
Have students be the teachers of
Yep.
what engages them.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's roll into this so other people can join the conversation. We'd love to hear your comments at the end, listeners. Thanks for being here. Hello, and welcome to the Ms. Behavior Podcast. We are the podcast for college student conduct professionals. My name is Colette.
And I'm Kurt, and we are joined today by my first ever higher education supervisor, Cyndi. Cyndi,
Yay.
welcome.
Happy to be here. Great reunion plus.
Yes, I was trying to think this morning when the last time was that I saw you in person, and was it even in this century?
I do not believe it was because you had left the Happy Valley for the Wild Wild West.
Yes.
And we stayed in contact for a while that way. And then
Yes.
everything else has been online since.
I think about that often. I spent a year as a resident assistant working with you, and then you took me under your wing. I was working a horrible job at a hotel, and Cyndi said, "Do you want to come back and be my assistant area coordinator and do conduct?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And I did that for a year, and then she said, "You got to go. You got to do something different in the kindest way possible."
Well, it was. It's a thing that you need to grow. I think that's the
Yes.
thing. When you see somebody that has knowledge, skills, and abilities, that push for growth is important. And I never want anybody to stand and nest too long.
So, Kurt, it was not your intent to go into student affairs as you were graduating undergrad?
It sort of was. I think I got about halfway through my senior year as a resident assistant, and I had intended to continue and possibly do a master's in either psychology or hospital administration. I thought I would run a counseling center. And one day I was talking to Cyndi in our one on one, or maybe I just stopped by your office, and I said, "I really just wish I could do this job, be an RA for a career." And she looked at me, she's like, "Well, what do you think I do?" And I think up until that moment, I guess I had in my head that Cyndi was just doing this for fun. Like she just came and hung out with a bunch of RAs, and she's like, "This is a career, and this is what we do." And I think that's when I started thinking seriously about it, and it just sort of stuck with me. And when she called, and I was working night shift at a hotel, and here's an opportunity. I jumped on it. I did that halftime, and I also worked for when we were allowed to do two part-time jobs at a school. I worked in the admissions office as well, coding applications. So, Cyndi, this is all your fault.
Take full responsibility.
Cyndi, what's your origin story, particularly with roles that had to do with student conduct? How did you get into this crazy field?
Well, this is an amusing patchwork. I'll try to put it together. I was an orientation leader and a resident assistant at my undergrad at Kent. I graduated, moved to Columbus, Ohio, and actually worked in training and development. I worked for a small interconnecting phone company doing training for end users. I'd done that for several years. I had 2 children and then went wackadoo. I want to go back into higher ed. And I applied for several positions. It was the fall. I got a call on a Monday for a position at Penn State in residence life for someone who was leaving in November. So I interviewed on a Monday. I interviewed in person the next Monday. Then I worked there the next Monday.
Whoa.
And so I landed in a position in West Halls. West Halls was predominantly upperclassmen students, kind of a more relaxed sort of area with a couple special living options, and that was great. And then an opportunity came the first summer. I'd been there, so the fall and the spring. An opportunity came for North Hall, which was a small, single contained unit, about 900 students, away from everything else. A whole building of special level options and a very, very engaged student council. And I was like, of course I'll move.
Oh.
And it was also this close to the creamery too, I remember.
Yep. We hung out between all the arts buildings and architecture, and then with a sideline that we could go to the famous University Creamery. Very true. I stayed in residence life there until I moved into a program administrator position where I did all the student programming for the entire campus, everything that happened in a residence hall, including a lot of weekend programs, overseeing all the cultural and diversity activities in those. Then I became an assistant director in East Halls. 47 predominantly first-year students, and was moving through all those pieces, and things were looking great. And I got an opportunity then to move into an academic college as the director of diversity enhancement programs. I was there for 7 years at Penn State. Then I moved into Ohio State to the senior director for graduate student recruitment and diversity issues in the graduate school at Ohio State. Then I was there for 9 years and made the jump, moved into nonprofits, doing training and development sort of activities, reskilling adults to move into positions that had been displaced, moved that back into a university where I was doing career development, and last September made a jump to public service, doing training and development for the county that I live in.
Very cool. What a journey.
There is a thread that runs through.
Yeah.
As you think back on those residence life days, I know for those of us who have worked at small schools, we know Penn State as the school that won the biggest party school in the country consistently. What sorts of discipline cases do you remember from those days?
No, you can't even imagine. When I was on duty in North Halls, I was also on duty for East Halls, that predominantly first area I was talking about. My children were small when we were living in a residence hall. On a weekend night, I would be going over to East Halls with my children's wagon to fill with duffel bag full of bottles. And he carried them up the stairs and he click down the hall. And we walked out and it was just kind of like, really, dude? If you would have used the elevator, we never would have hurt you.
I'm sort of heartened to hear this, though, because I think sometimes the perception is schools that have reputations like that, there's no accountability. But it sounds like there was.
There's plenty of accountability, but the very best far-reaching discipline story I could ever tell you. In our North Halls area was very highly engaged, a lot of creative people, and every spring there was a giant outdoor festival that lasted all weekend long. And it had full engagement of the dining commons, it had full engagement with our housing services. I mean, there were tents, there were stages, there were bands, there were games. It was amazing. In Kurt's building, something was happening, and an RA named Jason had come to me and he's like, you got to see this. You've really got to see this. And I go over on the 3rd floor and a door opened to a room. And it's a typical residence hall room. You walk in the door, to your right-hand side, there's a half wall where the closets are. As soon as you walk in the room, each and everything is covered with visqueen plastic, floor to ceiling, the walls and everything. As you walk in and there's that right-hand door wall, there are pockets of plastic sewn on with IDs in them. As you enter the room, it's a 2-foot deep Jell-O pit. They knew they were going to get caught. They wanted to have their IDs at the ready. But 2 feet deep, red Jell-O with people in it, not fully clothed.
What would have been some typical outcomes of cases like, and when was it, circa early 90s or
Right,
Yeah. I
right.
think one of the outcomes was that they had to eat the jello. Is that?
I think some of that had already happened. But in these cases, one of the things was always to make it educational. My goal was never to have a student leave the institution unless their behavior was unsafe for themselves or others. So in these cases, in a case like this, the issue was cleaning the room. I mean, housing services couldn't be involved at all. This wasn't their labor. All that had to be removed. Everything had to be cleaned. Everything had to go back in. And then this, beyond that, the student would have policy-based sanctions based on the university system. But they weren't malicious. It wasn't about the damage. They were doing this fun thing. But yes, indeed, there were consequences. And I think it's the same thing when you think about alcohol, you think about drugs. These things happen in the residence halls. I mean, there were physical altercations. I mean, they were just the kind of things you move forward with. But I always worked within the realm of whether I was working directly with a student or a group of students or student staff, paraprofessionals, going through the pieces that what we do before and after with that student is far more important than what happens with the incident.
I think every year that I was at that school, I can think of one big thing that happened. The first year that I was there, the floor underneath me, the guys decided to turn the hallway into a slip and slide. And this
Yeah,
was a long, I'm talking like 100-foot long stretch
at least, yeah.
that they had just taken trash cans full of water and filled it with, I guess, baby oil and shampoo or whatever, and made it slick, and were running down the hall and sliding. And of course, the people under them are now, the ceiling's dripping. My sophomore year, somebody on my floor decided to have a football party where they all wore diapers, and they weren't allowed to leave the room all day, and they drank beer and of course had to use the diapers. And then the university police came and wrote it up. It was possibly one of the funniest police logs I had ever seen.
Yeah.
But as a conduct officer, I do remember the wagon very clearly, because one of my first weekends, the weeks after one of the first weekends that we opened, I walked into my office, which wasn't a small office, opened my door, and the entire floor was covered in alcohol. And Cyndi, for the life of me, I can't remember what we did with it. I think, did we have to pour it down the drain in that shower?
No, if it was open at the time, we let the students watch us dump it. If it was open. If it was closed, we returned it to the office and the police picked it up.
Okay. Because I'm thinking I didn't get any of it, so.
Well, I used to think it'd be a great thing if we would have an auction at the end of the year for any student over 21. We could have made significant funds to support residence life activity.
That would have been a great idea. I love that. One of the things that we've talked about a couple times is the many training opportunities that conduct officers have these days. But way back in the 1900s, I was trying to think about what my training looked like, and I made some notes. I think that my recollection was I basically was invited to sit in with you on 2 or 3 cases, and then it was, I said, the Wild Wild West. I was on my own, and I would come to you, and when something was tough, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. But what I loved, because we were in that model, I was thankful that I had you as a mentor, because the things that stuck out for me the most, it was never about shaming anybody for you. You were always brutally honest in the kindest way. And it was always very conversational. You took time to get to know the student before you talked about the situation. And I think that was important for me as I was starting on my journey as a conduct officer. So I'm always thankful that even though we didn't have a lot of training, I at least got that time with you to do that kind of work.
Well, I don't think you remember, but actually you had a session of training with the Office of Conduct and Standards.
Yes, I do remember that. It was a legal person.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But that was not very impactful.
Right, but we would have a session with them talking about the ramifications on and off campus, the things that you had to call campus police for at those points. Like there were all those points that would go through. They talked about the actual process, everything from the RA making a write-up to what you had to cover in that sit down session with the student what the sanctions were based on behavior, what you could do and what you couldn't do. So we did have that. But I think there was that sit beside, go through. And as I recall, it went both ways. You sat in on mine and I sat in on yours until I felt that you were safe and comfortable with what you were doing. One of the other things is we also, back in those days, while it wasn't procedure that you needed to do, we always made sure we were safe. So we had adjacent offices with an administrative assistant in between us. We always made sure if somebody came in and was a little hot, that the door didn't completely close.
And Peggy was a phenomenal diffuser. This woman had the gift of stories, and I think she just made everybody feel at home, regardless of why they were there.
Much agree with that. Peggy's still doing great.
I'm trying to think about the other thing that makes me laugh is the forms that we had to fill out, the triplicate forms. Everything was on a triplicate page, and we had to those were the sanctions that we had available to us. It was, I don't remember what they were at this point, but all the paperwork involved, none of it electronic.
And it was all paper.
Yep.
I mean, from the RA write-up, and when the RA would write it, it was in triplicate as well. So at the time, the student would get a copy of what they were being charged with at the time of the incident. Then it would come back to the office, and that would be processed in the way that that student would be contacted to schedule. And then at the actual interaction, you would fill out the form, once again in triplicate, and then all that information in that paper form would go to the Office of Conduct and Standards.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what computers were like back then in the mid 90s. I had to go in my office, turn my computer on, and then go into the main office, say good morning to Cyndi, good morning to Peggy, get some coffee, come back, and it was just now finishing booting up. And that computer was where I got one of my first very important lessons from Cyndi, because I was making an advertisement for a program that I was doing on homophobia, and I think it was Print Shop that we had access to, and I was very proud. I made a sign for my program. I think it had the title, the date, and the time, and I very proudly called Cyndi out to look at it, and she's like, that's great, but what if you added some other elements to this? And I was like, boom, whoa, I can add graphics to something. And I think that just that permission to be creative for something that I didn't feel like was going to be a super creative program was all I needed. And I have, from that day forward, I've loved formatting and advertising, and I did some marketing for higher education at one point as a career. So, but I was thankful, Cyndi, that you were both brutally honest with me, but in the most caring way possible.
Well, I think this is a topic actually we should go a little deeper on.
I agree, like engaging.
Right.
Because now students can use Canva and make these like professional looking documents, but learning how to really engage people is still the same issue it was 30 years ago.
Well, but I think one of the things 30 years ago, when Kurt was still an RA, while the area that we lived in was a little more welcoming community than maybe some other parts of campus at that time to diversity, Kurt had some residents that were challenging, and challenging to him as a staff member and challenging to him as a person. And we had lots of conversations in one-on-ones and outside one-on-ones about working with people to treat Kurt better and to treat others better. And Kurt did a lot of work. And there was this miraculous moment where light bulbs came on and hearts became open. Kurt was making a bulletin board about sexual health. And this is back in the days when we really did bulletin boards, where you cut up magazines and construction paper, and boy, you were happy if you had the letters already pre-cut and those kind of things. Kurt was in his room working and cutting, and two of these individuals came into the room and were first just kind of kicking his tires about, like, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And Kurt explained one of the guys picked up one of the magazines and started looking. And Kurt said something to the effect to the individual, like, you need to be a little more open-minded. And the guy looked at him and said, I'm looking at the magazine. Isn't that enough?
It was an Out magazine, and in retrospect, that was a big leap for that guy.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. He had busted my chops quite a bit, so I did feel a little justified in being like, listen, yeah. But no, and I appreciated Cyndi processing that with me afterwards, because I was ready to hold on to that to the death, that he could have been doing more.
Right.
Part of that story that really strikes me, though, right now I meet with so many students when I'm like, well, what are your conversations with your RA like when you talk about this? And they do not know, but sadly more, the RA does not know them, let alone coming into their room, talking. Even if they disagree, that would be a magical moment for people to have a conversation in disagreement. But that says something to me, Kurt, that they felt comfortable going in your room and yanking your chain a little.
I think I was a little bit of a Pollyanna too, because just thinking about being in this all male dorm in the middle of the 90s, in the middle of the AIDS crisis, being relatively out and queer, and having my door open, cutting out stuff from Out magazine is now wild to me. Yeah, I wonder if 50-year-old Kurt would do the same thing. I don't know.
Well, but I also think one of the things in retrospect, when we think about that time period, we can talk about not having computers and not having cell phones and not having these pieces. We had many more conversations. I mean, I had standardized programs 2 nights a week in our residence hall area. And on Sunday evening, I would have something in our cultural lounge, which is a dedicated space in every residence hall area. They were nicely decorated. They were comforting spaces. I would have the same group of 6 guys come that would act like they were only there for the food. But they would stay for whatever we were talking about and whatever we were doing, and then they wanted to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Very different than today, where they don't have to have talking interactions. I mean, we would have floor programs. We would have building programs. We would have people come to things. We had things where there were more people there than we could handle. But that's very different than the experience today.
It's Cyndi, I might say also, there aren't a lot of spaces where those 6 students would feel comfortable saying something and not fear getting canceled, saying something that doesn't come out right or that offends somebody, and there's no place to talk it all the way through. So those were special opportunities to just be open.
Well, but I also think there's something about that relationship before. There was a young man that I would actually say was my nemesis, that he was argumentative about anything that I did in the residence hall area. But he came to programs, he would ask them, he would make appointments to talk to me, and you'd be like, oh no, not again. And time after time after time, well, as my career had gone on and I was no longer the residence life coordinator of that area and I was doing programming for all of campus, I came back to my office one day and there was a note from this guy shoved under my door. He'd graduated several years ago. Well, I get in and I get this note and I look at it and I kind of had a Well, about that time, my phone rings in my office and the person that was now the director of the Office of Conduct for the university, he was on the phone and he said, hey, are you in your office? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, you won't believe who just left my office. And I'm like, who? And it was this guy. Well, 2 years later, this guy had come to terms of who he was, what his place was in the world, and why he had been so fitful throughout. In his note, he had come out, he had a partner, they were going to have a child, and you're just kind of like, wow, I'm glad you could beat me death to get to you.
That's a good story.
It was something.
Yeah. It is funny to be able to be nostalgic about that time now, but I am now thinking, like, this is also a time where not a lot of people had TVs in their room. I think the college that year had just gotten cable on campus. So I remember very clearly, Cyndi, those programs you hosted. You let me co-host one with you. We showed the movie Higher Learning.
Yes.
And I thought maybe 10 people would come. I think there were 100 people crammed into this room.
And it wasn't a big room.
No, it was jam-packed. And Cyndi said, okay, we're going to stop the movie halfway through and ask a couple questions. And she's like, you're going to ask the first couple questions. And people were like, shut down the movie at this pivotal time. They're like, turn it back on. And little introvert me, I was like, I just have a couple questions I want to pose to the room.
Yep. But we did. We were able to get funding to do first-run films in the residence halls. In that time period, I think when Kurt was still an RA, Schindler's List came to State College, and Residence Life bought out the theater for one performance of the film. and have students come to it for free. I mean, so we really coordinated tactically about what we needed to do and what we were going to talk about. And students were willing to talk about it. It might not have been all 500 people that were in the theater, but you had a robust 50 or so people afterwards who wanted to talk.
I remember you would periodically wheel the TV into the lobby of the Commons when important things were going on. I remember standing next to you watching I think we watched the verdict from the OJ trial.
Yes, we did.
In the lobby when Pedro Zamora died.
Yeah.
From the real world.
Yeah.
I remember watching that in the lobby.
And people were crying. Let's be really true about that moment.
Yep.
There was a large group of people, and there was this collective sort of sigh and a shared experience. And these all weren't people that you would say were on the sunny side. These were people just saying, wait, this young guy, this gorgeous guy, this active guy died. Let's talk about this. And then we carried on from that with a series of sexual health presentations.
Yep. And we had somebody locally who was living with HIV and was brave enough to say, I will come and talk to students. And it wasn't a huge crowd, but to talk to somebody who was living with AIDS at the time was really very eye-opening. I think that year we also had, maybe it was the year before, the AIDS quilt came to campus and was in rec hall. So it was an interesting time to be a college student.
But I think the difference was we were really able to have those conversations on multiple levels and multiple locations. In that time at Penn State, we had faculty people that were aligned with our special living options that would come into the halls and do programming with us. We'd host a meal in the dining commons in a private dining room on a topic, and we would have faculty engaging not only with students but with residence life and student affairs staff on critical conversations.
I still believe students want that. The amount of loneliness that they test for, and just feeling isolated. COVID did not make things better.
Yeah.
But it was something we were already seeing before the pandemic. And I think students are hungry for interaction with other people. And I hate to write this all off as nostalgia or as aspirational. What are the things we can do now to even help students have low stakes conversations?
Well, but one of the things that has to happen when they come to college, you can't wait, and it's never a one and done. You've got to think, what happens to that student and his or her family, their family, when they come for that first orientation session in the summer? Do they learn to understand that there's going to be learning in and outside of the classroom? Do they understand you need to have these engagements in the residence halls with student affairs staff, campus programming, student organizations? When they come to campus, what's really happening in that first week? What is the engagement for on and off campus students? And what are you offering? Because one of the things you have to normalize that it's a good thing to come Wednesday night to that space where there's going to be somebody talking. You've got to know that faculty people are aligned with you. We used to have faculty folks that would give extra credit for students attending our programming. And you start to think, well, how do these things build? You want an overall experience. And you want that discussion to be inclusive of all. You know, somebody's got to say, I believe in blank, and other people have to say, talk to me about that. How did you arrive there? Well, you believe in blank, but can you accept that I believe in blank and make that conversation okay? It's hard work. There's a reason people leave student affairs work. It's hard work.
Well, and now faculty, too. Yeah. There's students that are videotaping them or weaponizing clips of things that they're saying about sensitive topics.
Right. One of the things in those topics is you have to hear both sides. I mean, we all have a tendency to be lovely with the things we believe in. But when somebody doesn't believe what I believe and they're espousing something, they need to be able to talk about it as long as it's not harmful to others and they're not causing physical and emotional harm. And that may be in another space. I think that's where we've missed the boat. I think we leaned away. I'm a child of the 70s. I mean, I went to Kent State for my undergrad. And I think that we've kind of left that holistic sort of conversation and we've moved into thing right or wrong. And if you're not what I believe, I'm shutting you down. And that happens on both sides.
Yeah.
And it's counter to community building, too. Where I work now, we're not a residential campus. So I think there has always been the challenge of building community when you have a lot of people who are coming just for classes and then they have to go to work. But it was even more pronounced after COVID. You know, the student center where we would normally see at lunchtime 100 students, maybe there were 10 or 15. And I know that our student affairs folks went to a lot of effort to rethink that space and what it was for. And at our school, it started with games. And we put a pool table down there and a ping pong table and a foosball table. And suddenly people are spending time and then they're talking. And now we're back to having the 100 people that were there before. And then what's the next step with that? How do you start engaging people in meaningful conversations outside of the classroom and make those safe spaces now that you've built this foundation of feeling like you belong someplace or you have someplace to be?
Our campus also just unveiled a new game room, and I'm like, wow, really? We are so stretched budgetarily, but you really look at it with a bigger lens, and those are the building blocks of conversations, comfort, critical thinking. It has to have a foundation.
Well, and I do think there's things. So I mentioned my son Ben earlier. In our first apartment in North Halls, we were in the Commons building, and my office was right next door to my apartment. From the time my son was like 4 or 5 years old, he was completely a gaming boy. And back on the system on the TV, he would lure students into our apartment to play games with him. Today, my son had a career path in TSA. He was a training officer, and he left that, and he owns a gaming store in Boston.
Oh, wow.
And so he often talks about the variety of folks that will come in for these different gaming events and the games they play, the online, the ones you play in person, but the wide variety of folks that come together around this, that commonality, as opposed to separation.
Mm-hmm.
I bought my husband an Xbox last year for his 60th birthday. And it was inspired by a podcast, the Smart List podcast with Will Arnett and Sean Hayes. And they were talking about their gaming addiction. But they talked about these violent games that they play with their male friends where they're like, you don't have enough guns, get more ammo, shoot the hell out of that guy. Oh, hey, how's your wife's chemotherapy treatments going? Hey, that thing with your kid, did that work out? Okay, now go get the cannon.
Yep.
And they would have these really tender conversations. And I'm like, is that something that we could be creating intentionally if we know students are going to be on their devices? Just up the intimacy level of what those interactions could be. I'd love to know more from your son.
I think there's a whole thing about that sort of on the side. I guess I would have more stories about that. My older son, Jamie, was living and working at State College, and he played online games with people. My sons play World of Warcraft. And so Jamie was playing with a guild, that's his group, and they were New Orleans based. My son left State College, moved to New Orleans, where he knew no one, moved into a guest house that people he gamed with had, got a job, and he was in New Orleans for 15 years, and now he's in Nashville. But I mean, the whole constant was this gaming thing. I was stranded once in the airport in Chicago. One of the towers, a guy had gone kind of crazy in the tower, and things were backed up. There were no cars, there were no planes, there was a storm. Jamie called somebody he knew from gaming who came and picked me up because there weren't any hotels close to the airport available. And there were no cars. And so people he knew came and picked me up and put me in a hotel till I could fly out. So I think you can create community that way, but there has to be a reason for people to go there. But I think one of the pieces is are we training campus-based staff, especially when we talk about RAs in the residential situation, to go a little deeper.
Right.
And to meet people where they are, because it's really hard. If you think you're only there to manage the environment and negative behavior, you're not having those conversations. They're not coming into your room. They're not going to go to dinner with you. They're not going to go to dinner with other people. Like, there has to be that deeper go. It requires more, but I believe students who are living on campus, paying the prices that they have to pay to be there, deserve more.
Yeah. And, the school I work at now, being non-residential, a big part of the conversation around retention is feelings of belonging. And it's not just the academic supports that we put in place, but what are we doing to engage students while they're there and help them feel like they are someplace that values them and that is helping them get from one part of their life to the next.
Well, I guess I can double down on that. Where I teach is online. There is a campus, and there might be some students that come in and a few international students, but The vast majority are online 100%. I mean, when I'm teaching, I can have a student in California, a student in Florida, students all over the state of Ohio, and we meet like this. I mean, so there's all the pieces each week. Like in your grading, how do you engage? I mean, they turn in 3 assignments a week. I comment on every single assignment. You know, if you're on track, I tell you you're on track. Imagine that, Kurt. And if you're not, I tell you you're not.
I guess some things never change.
I think that's one of the things about these intentional activities that you have to undergo. I think that even when we're looking at commuter students and online students today, we have to be really mindful about AI and the impact of that in the classroom. Do I think it's okay to use? Yes, I do. Do I think a student has to be responsible? Yes, I do. I've seen something, I'll be like, somebody hallucinated. Was it AI or you?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we have to think about when a student's engaging this, how do we help them to do it the right way? I think that when we think of terms of conduct and standards, there we are again, because when does that turn? So I think there's a lot of things we need to do as students in commuter and remote environments to help educate them. I mean, any college campus, whether it's online as mine, face-to-face as yours as Colette, we have more rules on our campus than they have in their home. And that's always held true.
That's a good point.
I only meet students on Zoom. I'm not in Boston, but in so many ways, it's so much more intimate. Just like today, I can see your dog. You're showing us a part of your life today that we wouldn't get to see in an office.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other things in these environments, like I don't have a background up or anything, but I've had students say, depending on where my camera is, like though you can see the corner of this blue wall. That whole blue wall is covered with vintage frames that I picked up off the street and reframed things in. And so there'll be students like, oh my gosh, where'd you get that? I love that wall. Is that a backdrop? And then you can talk about their space and you know, what they're doing and where they are, but they need that contact. They need you to know their name.
Yeah.
And that you're a real person. You're a real human that's talking to them. Can I ask, I'm so fascinated that you teach a class in pop culture, because that feels like there has to be an extension of you in some way, or am I just sort of
it's all. So my graduate work was actually in American Studies. So I focused on issues of race, gender, and class. So material culture things are great. But in teaching this class, it goes from 1800 to 2005.
Okay.
So, right. And so students are doing projects over those particular eras. They're divided in groups. But the side on the other side is them exploring the principles of popular culture to understand what popular culture is, how it works. And a lot of folks don't seem to understand until they get in. Some students are placed in the class. And so I used to work there full time. So the academic advisors know me. So they will place students in my class intentionally. And so I don't know, my advisor said I had to take this class. I know it fills a humanities requirement. And then they'll find out, like, wait a minute, you know, I love Marvel. I can look at every assignment in this class, aside from my project, depending on my era. I can look at Marvel. I can find articles in the Journal of Popular Culture about Spider-Man, and I can write about Spider-Man for credit. If you saw my opening presentation for the class, a student a few terms ago was super duper into Marvel, and he said, hey, I can do all your slides. And all my slides, so students who aren't present the first night have a follow-up assignment, alternative assignment, where they watch the video. He has embedded characters and scenes from popular culture throughout my presentation, and one of the things the students have to do in the assignment is tell me what you saw.
Very cool.
And those are called Easter eggs. I don't know if you know that. So if you go to a Marvel film and you see something that's wackadoo, that's called an Easter egg.
Yep.
And so my whole presentation is full of those, and the student designed it for me.
Nice.
So I think when we look at these pieces, you go through and they say, well, wait a minute, if I'm wearing a certain kind of sweater, this is where it came from. You know, I've had students look at an era and they show me everything through fashion. Now they have to hit on art, they have to hit on industry, they have to hit on politics, but they can do it all in fashion. The best presentation I've ever had where I thought students like really got it, they had 1800 to 1900. A lot of people, when they start to look at that era, they're like, there's nothing. There's no popular culture. But these students look differently. They chose 3 artifacts that still exist today. The Library of Congress, the New York Times, and blue jeans.
Oh.
Those 3 artifacts, they illuminated that 100-year period.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's fun for me. There'll be periods that I'm very familiar with. They'll talk about the 70s, and sometimes I'll be like, I'll look in their draft and I'll say, you're missing something here. Why did this thing happen? If you're going to talk about this event, what did it hang on? Those kind of things to go through. It's fun with the fashion things. It's fun when they look at something in a new way. I had guys, actually they were all police officers. They used sports. They looked at sports from 1945 to 1960. And they talked about after the war, they talked about the rise in industry, they talked about the boomers, looking at sports that happened in the era. But those are often the things that as people, as individuals, can draw us together.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody comes in and they're talking about the origin of a hot dog, and they start to show where that came from historically, how it came to the United States, the things we've done to it, the best hot dogs, everybody has a hot dog memory. You know, even if you don't like a hot dog, you have a hot dog memory. And so it's a lot of fun every time. Like I really look forward to how they see things, because everything's online. So when they write a student-led discussion, so you read an article and you write 2-3 paragraphs about it. And then 3 other peers have to respond to that with their ideas and thoughts. And so you'll hear somebody write something about Beyonce, and they'll write 3 paragraphs about a story they read, an article they read about Beyonce. And you'll have 3 other people that write back about why they enjoyed this article and their Beyonce experience. And so it pulls them together. When they do their projects at the end, I mean, we meet the first class. I grade them every week, 3 assignments. My classes are 6 weeks long. That's the other thing. It all happens in 6 weeks.
Wow, it's fast.
In the 6th week, they have a project that they've done as a group. They come together to present it. And sometimes it's absolutely magical because of the ability that the students have to do a presentation. Although sometimes with Prezi, they make me sick. But they'll really do great things. The other thing is students often comment afterwards. They do a reflection paper as one of the final assignments of the course, and they'll talk about what they thought things were and what they've learned. And there's often an illumination around human values throughout. When somebody pulls up something different that they didn't understand, they'll write specifically, you know, in the presentation from 1960, I didn't understand that these 3 events had happened. And we might think everybody understands the social political things that happened in the 1960s, but a lot of folks don't. And then when they see it presented by their peers, there's a whole different
Context, yeah. It is interesting as somebody who did not grow up a digital native to see how community is evolving online. Both, and I see it when I teach classes online, but also I think about TikTok specifically, and I'm going to make a pop culture reference. Cyndi, have you watched Heat of Rivalry yet?
Yes.
For a long time, I was just a TikTok consumer, but that is a show that pushed me to actually record TikTok, and I feel like I have found some community online in the parasocial aspects of watching people watch clips of it or talk about it or very slowly analyze scenes and break down context. And it's interesting to me that you start to see friendships develop online around topical areas like you mentioned.
And I do think one of the other things you see in these online courses, someone will offer, like you wrote about blank, blank, blank. Have you read this? Like I have a book. This was recommended to me by a student.
The name of the book is Real Life.
Yeah, but this was recommended to me by a student, and I went out and got it.
Those are the best.
That is really cool. And I think to your point, creating space for this community to happen, regardless of if it's on a physical campus or in a virtual environment, is so important. And I think it is a good question to ask student affairs professionals and conduct officers. Are we teaching people to engage in dialogue that helps create those spaces where these kinds of things can happen?
Well, the next part of that is, are we modeling that?
Mm-hmm. And Cyndi, I know that you model those kinds of things all the time because I used to say to myself, what would Cyndi do? If I have to walk into a room full of 20 drunk people as an introvert, I could not bring myself, Kurt, to walk into that room, but I thought, this is what Cyndi would do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I wore my Cyndi persona like a safety blanket plenty of times until it started to feel like something that I could do.
You could.
You were a phenomenal role model in that regard.
Well, I appreciate that, but always know you never would have gotten the tap to come back and to work as a professional in my office if the knowledge, skills, and abilities weren't there to perform. It was always there.
Thank you. And I also have to say, you said something when you arrived early today. What was it?
To be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late. And to be late is inexcusable.
So my very first staff meeting with Cyndi, I was accidentally late, and so was somebody else, and you asked us both to stay after. You started the meeting and asked us both to stay after. And I don't remember what you said specifically, but I think it was that. And then you said, don't ever be late to a meeting again.
Right.
I can promise you, in the past 30 years of my career, I have never been late to a meeting since then.
And that also guarantees that we spend half of our life waiting for people.
Yeah. And that's it is something that does drive me a little nuts, is waiting for other people now. So no, I think it made an impression on me. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm so happy to meet the real person behind the stories.
What you're doing, Colette, is absolutely lovely. I think when we think about campus life, however that's defined these days, we think about people's conducts. I have always fallen on Ernest Boyer.
Mm-hmm.
That has always been the standard when I worked in higher education about what is a civil community. And I hope that whether it's online, on a commuter campus, on a residential campus, that's what we're promoting, because that's the people that I want to be.
And when you say civil, when you talk about Boyer, it's not about being polite or a rule follower. It's about creating citizens.
Correct.
Like a truly civil, big picture. Right. Yeah.
It's a broader engagement than the life of us all.
Yes. Beautiful. Let's end on that. I love that. Cyndi, thank you so much.
This has been so much fun, Cyndi.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. We did want to remind everybody that we're going to be at ASCA next week, and we've got swag.
So come and find us. I don't know, do we have any social media ways for people to find out where we're hiding?
Yeah, join us on Instagram, LinkedIn, even TikTok, Facebook, all the places you do your socials.
If there's free coffee someplace, we'll probably be there too.
That's probably where we'll camp out. And we have some of those tiny, fuzzy little microphones to talk to you if you're brave.
I love fuzzy microphones.
Me too. We'll see you next week in DC, y'all.
Bye,
Thanks
folks.
for tuning in. Misbehavior is written and produced by Colette Shaw and Kurt Doan. Theme music was written and performed by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. You can contact Ms. Behavior at msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com. That's msbehaviorcollege@gmail.com.